My name is Hazel Cooper. I was 34 when this happened. And until that Thanksgiving, I believed that if you built your life carefully enough, nothing truly collapsed without warning. I believed in steady things, predictable things, the kind of life where you make the right decisions, take responsibility, and things, maybe not perfect, but at least don't fall apart behind your back. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio with my younger sister Erin and our dad Ronald. My mom died when I was 19. After that, it was just the three of us trying to figure out how to keep being a family without her. Dad owned a 2-story brick house on the east side of town. It wasn't big, it wasn't impressive, but it was everything. Birthdays, holidays, late-night conversations at the kitchen table, arguments that cooled into quiet forgiveness. That house held all of it. And after Mom died, even as everything else changed, the house didn't. Maybe that's why Dad held on to it so tightly. Maybe that's why we all did. I moved out in my mid-20s, built my own life, made mistakes, got married, got divorced, ended up renting a condo about 20 minutes away. Erin stayed. Or maybe it's more accurate to say, she never really left. At the time, I told myself she was just being the better daughter. She stopped by more, took Dad grocery shopping, managed his doctor appointments, set up his medications in those plastic organizers with the little labeled compartments. She had a key to the house. Then, slowly, she became part of the house. You don't notice that kind of shift right away. It happens quietly, like furniture being rearranged while you're not looking. Every family has roles people fall into without realizing it. I was the dependable one, the one who showed up when something broke, when something needed fixing. Erin was the emotional one, quick to cry, quick to react, somehow always managing to get her way anyway. And Dad was the peacekeeper. After Mom died, he avoided conflict like it was something contagious. If tension showed up, he smoothed it over, ignored it, pretended it wasn't there. At first, nothing about Erin's closeness to him felt wrong. He was getting older. He needed help. She worked remotely for a medical billing company. Her schedule was flexible. Mine wasn't. I worked long hours managing operations for a regional supply warehouse. I wasn't there as often as I should have been. I knew that, and I carried that guilt quietly. Erin knew it too, which, looking back, probably made everything easier for her. Because from the outside, it looked simple. She was the devoted daughter. I was the one who meant well, but wasn't around enough. The first time something felt off was about 7 months before Thanksgiving. Dad mentioned casually over lunch that he had met with some paperwork people Erin recommended. He said it like it didn't matter, like he was talking about getting the gutters cleaned. I remember pausing mid-bite. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. He shrugged. "Estate planning, power of attorney stuff, boring old man business." I waited. He didn't elaborate. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He smiled, the kind of smile meant to end a conversation before it starts. "Don't worry about it. Erin's helping me handle everything." That phrase stayed with me longer than it should have. Not because estate planning was strange, it wasn't. He was 72, high blood pressure, diabetes, early signs of memory issues he refused to acknowledge. Of course he needed to plan. But Erin's helping me handle everything, without telling me. Later that week, I asked her about it. We were standing in Dad's driveway. She was loading cases of bottled water into the garage freezer like she owned the place. "Why didn't you tell me Dad was meeting with a lawyer?" I asked. She didn't even hesitate. "Because it was routine, Hazel. Not everything needs to be a family meeting." Her tone was light, dismissive. "I'm not saying it does," I said carefully, "but I'm his daughter too." She looked at me then, really looked, and there was something in her expression I didn't recognize, something sharper. "You're also the one who's never here," she said. "Someone had to handle it. That should have been a bigger moment than it was. But instead, I let it go. Because arguing in a driveway over something I didn't fully understand felt unnecessary. At least that's what I told myself. Over the next few months, things changed. Subtly at first. Then, not so subtly. Erin started answering Dad's phone. If I called, sometimes she'd pick up and say he was resting, or too tired to talk. When I stopped by unannounced, she was there more often than not. She decided what groceries he needed, which contractors to hire, whether he should attend family events. And if Dad disagreed, she didn't argue. She pouted, and somehow that was enough. He'd give in, every time. From the outside, it looked like care. Attentive, responsible, loving. But if you stood there long enough, really paid attention, it felt like control. One Sunday in August, I came over to fix a loose handrail on the back porch. I walked in through the back door and found Erin in Dad's den, going through a filing cabinet. She slammed the drawer shut so fast it echoed. "What are you doing?" I asked. She rolled her eyes like I was the problem. Organizing. In his locked cabinet? He gave me the key. I looked at Dad. He was in his recliner, barely glancing up from the TV. She's helping me get things in order, he said. Something in the way he said it felt rehearsed. Around that time, Aunt Denise started making comments. She'd always been blunt, the kind of woman who didn't soften things just to make them easier to hear. At a cousin's birthday cookout, she pulled me aside. Your sister is circling that house like a hawk, she said. I laughed. 'Cause what else do you do when someone says something that uncomfortable? Yeah, you think she's trying to get Dad to leave it to her? Denise didn't laugh. She just looked at me. Leave it to her? She said quietly. Honey, I think she's trying to get it before he's even gone. That was the first time the thought crossed my mind. Not as a joke. Not as gossip. But as something possible. I wanted to dismiss it. I tried to. But the more I watched, the harder that became. Then September happened, and everything shifted. September started with a phone call that should have been small. That was the thing about family betrayals, I learned. They rarely arrive looking dramatic. They show up disguised as paperwork, as a changed address, as a tiny detail nobody bothers to explain. Dad called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was still at work. He sounded distracted, unsteady in that particular way that made me sit up straighter before he'd even finished the first sentence. Hazel, he said, did you change the homeowner's insurance? I turned away from my desk and shut my office door. No, why? There was a pause on the line, and I could hear him shuffling paper. I got a letter, he said. It has Aaron's mailing address listed as the property contact. For a second, I didn't say anything. I just stared at the wall in front of me like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something harmless if I gave them long enough. What do you mean her address is listed? I asked. Another pause. She said she was helping with bills, he said, too quickly this time, like he wanted the explanation to arrive before the question had fully formed. Maybe that's all it is. Maybe. That word again. The word people use when they know something is wrong, but don't want to look directly at it. Can you show me the letter tonight? I asked. He hesitated just long enough for my stomach to tighten. Sure, he said finally. If you want. If I want. By the time I drove to the house after work, the sun had already started dropping behind the trees, turning the street gold in that soft, misleading way evening does when it wants everything to look peaceful. Dad looked nervous before I even stepped inside. That was what hit me first. Not anger, not confusion. Nervousness. And Erin was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, one ankle crossed over the other, looking less like a daughter helping her father, and more like someone waiting for a meeting to begin. I set my keys on the counter and looked at Dad. Can I see the letter? Before he could answer, Erin smiled without warmth. There's really no need to make a thing out of this. I looked at her, then back at Dad. I'd like to see it anyway. He reached for the envelope near the fruit bowl and handed it to me. I read it once. Then again. The policy contact information had been changed. Not the ownership, not yet. But the mailing contact for the property had been rerouted to Erin. Why? I asked quietly. Erin folded her arms. Because he forgets things, Hazel. I'm preventing mistakes. Dad kept his eyes on his coffee mug. It's easier this way, he murmured. That sentence did something to me. Not because of the words themselves, but because of how familiar they'd become. Everything was easier this way. Easier for Erin to manage. Easier for Dad to avoid conflict. Easier for everyone except the person still trying to understand why decisions kept happening in the dark. I set the letter down carefully. Easier for who? Dad didn't answer. Erin did. You really need to stop acting like every practical decision is some kind of conspiracy. I let out a slow breath. Changing insurance contact information without discussing it with him properly or mentioning it to me isn't practical. It's secretive. Her expression sharpened. Oh please. You don't get to swoop in after work twice a month and suddenly demand oversight. There it was again. The same accusation dressed in different words. You're not here enough. You don't know enough. You don't get a say. I looked at Dad, hoping, stupidly maybe, that he would interrupt, that he would say this had all been temporary or clerical or misunderstood. Instead, he just rubbed the side of his thumb against the ceramic mug and said nothing. And for the first time, I felt something colder than anger. I felt late. Late to a conversation that had clearly been going on without me for a long time. That night, I didn't fight. I could feel Erin wanting me to. She sat straighter every time I paused, like she was bracing for the version of me she'd already prepared herself to dismiss. The emotional one, the difficult one, the daughter who showed up too late and made everything harder. So I didn't give her that. I picked up my purse, told Dad I'd call him tomorrow, and left. In the driveway, I stood by my car longer than I needed to, staring at the kitchen window. Their silhouettes moved behind the curtains. Aaron's head tilted toward him. Dad's shoulders bent forward in that tired, defeated way I had started seeing more and more. And I had the sudden, ugly thought that she was not just helping him anymore. She was narrating his life back to him, telling him what had happened, what he needed, what was easiest, what was best. And slowly he was beginning to believe her version more than his own. October made everything worse. Dad fell in the garage one afternoon and sprained his wrist. It wasn't a catastrophic injury. No surgery, no hospitalization, nothing dramatic. But Aaron seized on it like it was evidence in a trial only she had known was happening. Suddenly, every conversation with relatives included phrases like transition planning and long-term stability, and making sure everything is protected. She said them with the same careful tone people use when they want to sound reasonable. Measured, concerned, mature. And because she said them in front of other people, they started sounding true. At Sunday lunch after church, I heard her telling Uncle Ray, "I just don't think Dad should have to carry the burden of decisions anymore." At a cousin's birthday dinner, she said, "The important thing is reducing his stress." At the pharmacy counter, I heard her murmur to the tech, "His memory has been getting worse." Each statement by itself could have passed as concern. Together, they built a case. I tried to counter it in practical ways. I asked Dad if he wanted some in-home help. "No," he said. I suggested a meal service twice a week. Too much fuss. I asked whether he'd feel better with a part-time nurse checking in. Aaron answered before he did. That would only upset him. I looked directly at Dad. Would it? He hesitated, then gave the answer I already knew she wanted. Maybe later. Later. Everything important in that house had started happening later. Questions later, conversations later, clarity later. Only the documents apparently were happening now. A week after the garage fall, I stopped by to drop off groceries and found Aaron in the hallway, outside Dad's bedroom, talking to him in a low voice. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I only froze because of the way she was speaking. Soft and patient in that condescending tone people mistake for kindness. "You know Hazel means well," she was saying, "but she gets dramatic. That's why I don't tell her everything. You need calm, not conflict." My throat went dry. There was a pause. Then Dad said tiredly, "I know." I stepped back before either of them saw me. I stood in the kitchen holding a bag of soup and bread like an idiot, staring at the counter, while my heart thudded too hard against my ribs. That hurt more than I expected. Not because Aaron was saying it. I could have handled that. Because Dad was starting to agree. Or maybe agreeing was simpler than resisting. Maybe that was all it was. But pain doesn't care much about the difference. A few days later, Aunt Denise called me out of nowhere. "You sound tired," she said as soon as I answered. "I am tired." "Mm-hmm." A beat. "And your sister still playing Saint?" I almost laughed. Something like that. Denise didn't rush me. She was good at that. Good at waiting in a way that made silence feel safe instead of awkward. So I told her about the insurance, about Aaron speaking for Dad, about the way every concern I raised was turned into proof that I was the difficult one. When I finished, Denise was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Hazel, I want you to hear me clearly." I leaned against my kitchen counter. "I'm listening." "You keep treating this like a misunderstanding," she said. "I don't think it is." Her words settled heavily between us. "I don't know what it is yet," I said. "Yes, you do. You just don't want it to be true." That was the problem. I did know, or at least some part of me did. The part that noticed how Aaron answered questions meant for Dad. The part that kept hearing rehearsed phrases in his voice. The part that knew guilt was being used as a leash. I just didn't have proof. And without proof, everything felt slippery. Accusations inside my own head. Patterns I couldn't quite pin down. A house that looked exactly the same from the outside while something inside it kept shifting out of place. Then came the Saturday morning, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I stopped by with cinnamon rolls from the bakery Dad liked, the one on the north side that used too much icing and always made him happy anyway. For once, the house was quiet. No television, no Aaron's car in the driveway, no sound of cabinet doors opening and closing like someone taking inventory of the place. Dad was in the shower upstairs. I set the bakery box on the counter and turned toward the dining room. That was when I saw the envelope. Manila, lying in the center of the table like it had been placed there deliberately. A yellow sticky note was attached to the front in Dad's shaky handwriting. Hazel, just my name. Nothing else. I remember walking toward it slowly. I remember the strain and pressure in my ears, like my body had already understood something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a deed transfer form. At first, the words didn't make sense. Not because they were complicated, because they were too clear. The property address was Dad's house. The transfer had already been filed. Joint ownership with right of survivorship. Ronald Cooper and Aaron Cooper. Her name already on the house. My hands actually went cold. I stared at the signatures next. Dad had signed. Aaron had signed. There was a notary stamp, dated 2 months earlier. For a second, I honestly thought there had to be another page, another explanation, something temporary, some legal wording I was misreading. But there it was. Real, finished, filed, not a future intention, not a discussion. A completed transfer. Upstairs, I heard the shower shut off, and in the sudden silence that followed, the whole room seemed to tilt. I was still holding the papers when Dad walked into the kitchen, toweling his hair. He stopped the second he saw my face. Then his eyes dropped to the document in my hands, and something inside him collapsed. "What is this?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was too controlled, too quiet. He sat down slowly at the kitchen table, like a man bracing himself for something he knew he couldn't avoid anymore. "Aaron," he started, then caught himself. "Aaron said it would protect the house." Protect it. The word echoed in my head in a way that felt almost absurd. Protect it from what? He rubbed his wrist, the one he'd sprained in the garage, like the memory of that fall had somehow followed him into this moment. "Probate," he said. "Bills, complications. And you weren't going to tell me?" He didn't look at me. "She said you'd overreact." I let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh, except there was nothing funny in it. Of course she did. "Did you understand this?" I asked. "When you signed it, did anyone explain that you were giving her ownership now, not later? Now?" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. That hesitation said everything he couldn't. "I thought it was later," he said finally, "when I was gone." My chest tightened. "Did you meet with a lawyer?" "Yes." "Who?" He frowned slightly, searching for the name. "I don't remember." That hit harder than anything else so far. "You don't remember who handled the legal transfer of your house?" He shook his head, looking embarrassed. Not defensive, not angry. Ashamed. "Aaron set it up," he said. "She said it was standard." Standard. I sat down across from him, the papers still between us like something fragile and dangerous at the same time. "Did you want this?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. He just kept rubbing his wrist, over and over, like he was trying to erase something invisible. I just want peace, Hazel," he said. There it was again. Peace. Not clarity. Not fairness. Not understanding. Just peace. And suddenly, I understood something I hadn't let myself see clearly before. Aaron wasn't forcing him. Not directly. She was offering him a way out. Out of decisions, out of responsibility, out of conflict. All he had to do was sign, and she would take care of everything, including the parts that should have belonged to him. "Do you know what this means?" I asked. He looked at me, and for the first time there was real uncertainty in his eyes. "No," he said. So I told him, carefully, piece by piece, that she now co-owned the house. That with rights of survivorship, it would automatically pass to her. That depending on the situation, she could block a sale. That combined with other legal tools, she could eventually control decisions he didn't even realize he was giving up. I watched his expression change as I spoke. Confusion first, then something sharper. Fear. "I didn't know it worked like that," he said quietly. I believed him. That was the worst part. "Then why did you sign?" I asked. He looked past me, out the window toward the driveway. "Because she cried," he said. I didn't say anything. "She said she'd given up so much helping me," he continued. "She said you had your own life, that if something happened, you'd move on, and she'd be the one left dealing with everything." Each word landed like something heavy and deliberate. She said this was the only way she'd feel secure. Secure. That word twisted in my chest. Not because it was unfamiliar, because it was calculated. She hadn't asked. She hadn't discussed. She had made him feel like he owed her something, like love had a price, like care required compensation. And that price was his house. I stood up so suddenly my chair scraped against the floor. "Dad," I said more firmly now, "this isn't okay." He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "I know," I said. And I did. That was what made it so complicated. He wasn't malicious. He was tired. Lonely. Afraid of being a burden. And Aaron had turned all of that into leverage. "We need to fix this," I said. He nodded slowly. But then he added something that almost made me lose my patience. "Not before Thanksgiving." I stared at him. "What?" "I don't want conflict," he said. "Not during the holiday." I almost argued. Every instinct in me said this was urgent, that waiting was dangerous, that every day this arrangement existed gave Aaron more ground. But then I looked at him, really looked, and I saw it. Not just fear, shame. He knew at some level that he'd made a mistake. and he wanted just a little more time pretending things were still normal. Just one more holiday where the cracks didn't show, even if that version of normal didn't exist anymore. I closed my eyes briefly, then nodded. 2 weeks, I said, but after that we fix it. No more delays. He nodded again, relieved in a way that made me feel both protective and deeply frustrated at the same time. I left before Erin came back, because if I had seen her in that moment, I don't think I would have kept my composure. Instead, I sat in my car with the engine off, the papers still in my hand, and tried to steady my breathing. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I called Aunt Denise. She picked up on the second ring. Well, she said, like she'd been expecting this call. She already put her name on the house, I said. Silence. Then a quiet, I knew it. I leaned back in my seat, staring at the ceiling of my car. He didn't understand what he signed, I added. Of course he didn't, Denise said. That's how this kind of thing works. I need a lawyer. I've got one, she said immediately. Family attorney. Sharp. Doesn't tolerate nonsense. Her name's Marissa. She gave me the number. I called the next morning. Marissa listened. Really listened. I told her everything. The paperwork. The insurance. The power dynamics. The way Erin positioned herself as the only reliable one. When I finished, there was a brief pause on the line. Then she said, "Bring me the copy of the deed, and anything else you can legally access, insurance letters, account notices, anything with a paper trail." Okay. And Hazel, she added. Yes. Do not confront your sister yet, not until we understand exactly what she's done. That part was harder than it sounded. But I agreed. Over the next week, everything I suspected started to solidify into something far more concrete. The deed transfer had been filed properly, legally valid, but the circumstances around it were questionable. Dad had met with a general practice attorney Erin found online, not an elder law specialist. No independent review, no cognitive assessment, no documentation that he fully understood the implications. The lawyer had done what was asked, not what should have been questioned. But then Marissa found something worse. Hazel, she said during one of our calls, your sister isn't just on the deed. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? She's also been named durable power of attorney. The words landed heavier than anything else so far. When? About 6 months ago. 6 months. 6 months of decisions I didn't know about. 6 months of her slowly positioning herself as the authority in every aspect of his life. Suddenly everything made sense. The insurance change. The intercepted calls. The way she spoke for him like it was her right. She hadn't just inserted herself into his life. She had legally anchored herself there. What can we do? I asked. Marissa didn't sugarcoat it. We can challenge the deed, she said, but it won't be easy. Why not? Because legally it was executed. To reverse it, we need to prove he didn't understand what he signed or that there was undue influence. Both options sounded ugly. Both meant dragging everything into the open. That will tear your family apart, she added gently. I let out a slow breath. It already has, I said. There was a pause. Then she continued. Doing nothing guarantees she eventually controls everything. That settled it. Not immediately. Not cleanly. But firmly. I spent 2 nights barely sleeping, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible outcome, every version of what could happen if I pushed this forward, and every version of what would happen if I didn't. Then, on the 3rd morning, Dad called me. He started telling me something about breakfast. Then, mid-sentence, he paused. Your mother would like that, he said. My stomach dropped. Dad, I said carefully, Mom passed away 15 years ago. There was a long silence. Then quietly, Right, of course. That was it. That was the moment everything became clear. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about protection. I called Marissa back that afternoon. I'm in, I said. We made a plan. Careful. Deliberate. Dad agreed to revoke the power of attorney, to sign a statement about the deed. But he still wanted to wait until after Thanksgiving. Marissa didn't like it. Neither did I. But legally, 2 weeks wouldn't destroy everything, if nothing else changed in the meantime. So I waited, and I watched, and I planned. Because if Erin had built her version of control quietly, I was going to dismantle it in the open. And Thanksgiving was coming. Thanksgiving at my father's house had always been Erin's favorite performance. That was the only way I could describe it now. Not a gathering, not a tradition. A performance. Everything curated down to the smallest detail. The table runner, the candles, the place cards written in careful handwriting like something out of a magazine spread. That year, she outdid herself. By noon, she had already posted a photo of the turkey in the oven with the caption, "Grateful for family." I remember staring at it on my phone and almost laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly her. By 5 o'clock, the house was full. Aunt Denise stood near the kitchen, watching everything with that quiet, knowing expression she always had when she sensed something about to unfold. Uncle Ray was already on his second drink. Two of my cousins hovered near the dining room, pretending to help, but mostly observing. And Erin moved through it all, like she owned not just the house, but the narrative. Her husband, Daniel, lingered near the hallway, polite but distant. In that way people get when they feel something is off but don't yet know what. Dad sat at the head of the table. He looked tired. But there was something else there too. Something steadier than I'd seen in weeks. We had talked that morning. He knew what was coming. Dinner started the way it always did. Safe topics. Football. Traffic. Someone's promotion. The kind of conversation that fills space without saying anything real. Erin laughed easily. Adjusted plates. Corrected small details. Every movement deliberate. Every smile practiced. And for a moment, just a moment, I understood why it had worked for so long. Because from the outside, it looked perfect. Then Uncle Ray said it, casually, carelessly. "Ronald, you're lucky to still be in this house. Not many people hold on to something like this for so long." Erin smiled. That same calm, effortless smile. "Well," she said lightly, "at least we know it'll stay in the family." Her eyes flicked toward me, just for a second. But it was enough. The room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough. I set my fork down. "That's interesting wording," I said. Her head tilted slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said evenly, "most people would mention Dad before talking about the house like it's already spoken for." Silence. That particular kind of silence families have. The kind that feels like everyone is holding their breath at the same time. Erin's expression hardened. "Oh my God, Hazel, not today." Dad looked down at his plate. Aunt Denise didn't miss a beat. "Actually," she said calmly, "today seems perfect." Erin's cheeks flushed. "I am not doing this in front of everyone." I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed the copy of the deed in the center of the table. "What is that?" one of my cousins asked quietly. Daniel leaned forward first. Then Uncle Ray. Then everyone else. Erin stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "You had no right." "Sit down, Erin." Dad's voice cut through the room. It wasn't loud, but it was firm in a way I hadn't heard in years. She froze. I said, "Sit down." Slowly, reluctantly, she lowered herself back into her chair. And then something happened I hadn't dared to hope for. My father spoke. Not perfectly, not like a prepared speech, but honestly. He told them everything. That Erin had brought him documents he didn't fully understand. That she had told him it was routine. That she had made him feel guilty, pressured, afraid of disappointing her. He admitted he hadn't realized her name was already on the house. That he didn't want that arrangement. Not anymore. Erin tried to interrupt. Once. Twice. The third time, Dad slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. "I am not finished." The room went completely still. He turned to Daniel. "Your wife has been making decisions I did not authorize," he said, "and speaking for me when she should not have been." Daniel's face drained of color. Then Dad looked around the table. "On Monday," he continued, "I am revoking the power of attorney and taking legal steps to fix the deed." For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. And then Erin broke. She started crying. Not quietly, not softly, but with a sharp, angry intensity that filled the room. "After everything I did for you," she shouted, "how dare you?" "I gave up my time for you," she continued, her voice rising. "I was the one here. Hazel got to live her life while I handled everything." I kept my voice steady. "Helping Dad doesn't entitle you to his house." Her eyes snapped toward me. "Easy for you to say," she shot back. "You always got away with doing less." "There it is," Aunt Denise muttered under her breath. Daniel finally spoke. Quiet at first, then firmer. "Erin, did you tell me the house was just for future planning?" She didn't answer. He tried again. "Did you tell me that?" Silence. That was enough. I saw it in his face. The shift. Recognition. The moment someone realizes the story they've been told doesn't match reality. And once that happens, it can't be undone. The next 10 minutes felt like watching something carefully built come apart piece by piece. Uncle Ray asked about the insurance changes. One of my cousins asked whether she had touched any bank accounts. Dad admitted some bills had been redirected. Daniel looked physically sick. Aunt Denise looked like she had been waiting years for this exact moment. And Erin? Erin changed strategies. First, she was angry, then defensive. Then suddenly, the victim. "You're all attacking me," she said, her voice shaking. "I was trying to protect him." The words echoed in the room. Protect. The same word she had used from the beginning. Only now it sounded hollow. I shook my head. This isn't protection, I said. This is control. Her eyes filled with something colder than anger. You're just jealous, she said. You think you deserve the house. For a second, I almost smiled, because it was so predictable. When you're caught, accuse the other person of the very thing you were doing. I don't care about the house, I said. I care that Dad understands his own decisions. There was a pause. That's the difference, I added. One is inheritance, the other is manipulation. No one argued with that. Dinner was over. No one said it out loud. But everyone knew. Daniel stood first, grabbed his coat from the rack. I'm leaving, he said quietly. You can come with me, or figure out a ride later. Aaron didn't move. Before he walked out, he turned to Dad. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know. Dad nodded, tired, but resolute. By the time everyone left, the house was quiet again. The turkey sat untouched. The candles had burned low. The air smelled like food and something heavier, something harder to name. I stayed, not because the dishes mattered, but because routine felt like the only thing holding the night together. We cleaned in silence for a while. Then Dad sat down at the kitchen table, looked around slowly. Your mother would be furious, he said. At Aaron, I asked. He gave a tired smile. At me, he said, for letting it go this far. I didn't respond right away, because part of me had been angry at him too. Angry that he avoided conflict, that he chose peace over clarity, that he let Aaron turn his kindness into something she could use. But looking at him then, smaller somehow in his own home, the anger softened. Because underneath all of it, he had just wanted to believe his daughter was protecting him. And that kind of hope is hard to let go of. On Monday, we went to Marissa's office together. He revoked Aaron's power of attorney, signed a sworn statement about the deed. And over the next few weeks, something happened that no argument could have achieved. Legal pressure, reality, consequences. Aaron eventually signed documents removing her name from the house. Not willingly, not gracefully, but she did it. And after that, she disappeared. 6 months of silence. Then one message. I hope you're happy. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I'm relieved Dad is protected. That was the truth. Things are different now. They will never be what they were before. But maybe they weren't supposed to be. Dad has support now. Real support. Not control disguised as care. We visit on separate days. Boundaries exist where blind trust used to be. They're not warm, but they're honest. And last Thanksgiving, it was just me, Dad, Aunt Denise, and a grocery store pie none of us pretended was homemade. No performance, no illusions, just truth. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like peace. Not the kind built on silence, the kind built on finally seeing things clearly. Because when people say family is everything, what they really mean is family reveals everything. Who protects, who manipulates, who stays quiet, and who finally speaks when staying quiet becomes its own kind of betrayal. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to play along.